Hello and welcome to the Good Food Institute's webinar on fermentation. My name is Daniel Gertner and I'm the business analyst here at GFI. Today, my colleagues and I will cover the evolving fermentation industry. We'll discuss the commercial landscape, consumer insights, investments, scientific progress, regulatory and public funding updates, and industry outlook. For those of you not yet familiar with the Good Food Institute, we are a nonprofit think tank working to develop the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just food system by advancing alternative proteins. We work across the areas of corporate engagement, science and technology, and policy. We are funded entirely by philanthropy, so if you find the insights and resources we provide useful, please consider donating. GFI's work focuses on feeding a growing population sustainably, efficiently, and safely. Conventional protein production contributes to some of the world's most pressing challenges, such as climate change, antibiotic resistance, pandemic risk, loss of biodiversity, and food insecurity. With global meat consumption projected to rise significantly by 2050, alternative proteins offer a globally scalable solution that can help prevent and mitigate harms from conventional protein production. We focus on making the products consumers love in ways that reduce environmental and public health risk. We do this by sharing open access research like the report we'll be discussing today, and engaging directly with food industry stakeholders, such as manufacturers, distributors, investors, scientists, and policymakers. This webinar is an overview of GFI's annual Fermentation State of the Industry report. We also publish State of the Industry reports for the plant-based and cultivated sectors, and webinars are available for those reports as well. I'd like to thank the many GFI team members who contributed to this project, as well as external partners who supported with data and fact-checking. If you'd like to help us make our reports, webinars, and other open access resources as accurate as possible, please tell us about your company by joining GFI's company database, which is accessible on our website, and respond to surveys when we send them out. Signing up for our monthly industry newsletter is the best way to stay updated on our research, and you can also do that through our website. Today's presentation will focus on fermentation for alternative proteins. GFI defines fermentation as the use of single-cell fungi and other microbes as production platforms to modify or produce proteins, fats, and other functional ingredients. Fermentation is increasingly being used to produce both ingredients and standalone alternative protein products. There are three main types of fermentation used in the alternative protein industry today. Traditional fermentation has been used for thousands of years to produce familiar products such as bread and beer. It uses microorganisms to modulate and process plant-derived ingredients. This results in products with unique flavors, nutritional profiles, and textures. Traditional fermentation can improve the sensory, functional, and nutritional attributes of many alternative protein ingredients. Precision fermentation is a form of specialized brewing that uses microbes as cell factories for producing specific functional ingredients. Precision fermentation is well positioned to create high-value ingredients that improve the sensory characteristics and functional attributes of plant-based products or cultivated meat. It can be used to make products like egg proteins, dairy proteins, animal-free meat proteins, including heme, and fats. Biomass fermentation leverages the high protein content and fast growth of microorganisms to efficiently produce large quantities of protein. Biomass fermentation offers the greatest opportunity to produce protein at scale because many microorganisms grow quickly and often double their weight in just a few hours. The microbial biomass itself can serve as an ingredient with the cells intact or minimally processed. Microbial biomass can be the main ingredient of a food product or serve as one of several ingredients in a blend. We're increasingly seeing fermentation play a role across the alternative protein product spectrum, from ingredients to end products. The fermentation subpillars are distinct in their production methods and end-use applications. Because of that, it can be difficult to discuss the technologies collectively. They each face unique challenges and opportunities in manufacturing, scaling, funding, consumer messaging, and government regulation. Although these fermentation technologies exist at distinct stages of industry development, key trends held across the fermentation and food sectors in 2023. The first trend was that the private capital environment moderated. It was negatively impacted by rising interest rates and an uncertain economic outlook. The second trend was that manufacturing capacity grew but remained at modest levels, contributing to elevated production costs relative to those of conventional counterparts. And the third trend was that while some individual companies enjoyed year-over-year sales increases, consumers had less room in their wallets for premium-priced protein products in 2023. We'll cover this push and pull of fermentation industry innovation in today's webinar. Significant progress was achieved in 2023, but we have a long road ahead to sizable market growth. With that, let's discuss fermentation's changing commercial landscape. 2023 saw pivotal developments, including the opening of at least 7 new fermentation facilities, the debut of several new products and companies, and continued commitment to the sector from large meat and consumer packaged good companies. All of these milestones signaled the industry's resilience and potential for long-term growth. Yet the year was not without its challenges. Funding constraints and difficulties with scaling posed two of the biggest bottlenecks for fermentation. These factors potentially moderated industry activity in 2023. The progress achieved in spite of those challenges is a testament to the resilience of companies, researchers, investors, and others involved in the industry. There are now more than 150 companies primarily dedicated to producing fermentation-enabled alternative protein products across every major world region. The vast majority of companies primarily operate in the biomass and precision fermentation spaces, but a handful of traditional fermentation companies are active as well. One trend we've seen in recent years is a growing number of companies diversifying beyond end product formulation and manufacturing. Companies are increasingly focused on bioprocess design and ingredient optimization. This advancement of the B2B ecosystem allows companies to focus on their core competencies and should allow the entire industry to function more efficiently over time. I'll note that these figures are likely an underestimate. It's common for companies to begin in stealth mode and announce themselves once they've completed a milestone, such as a fundraising round. In addition to more companies entering the space, we're also seeing more fermentation facilities come online. At least 7 new fermentation facilities opened in 2023, and several more broke ground or were announced. These included large commercial scale facilities like Meaty's 100,000 square foot facility that opened in Colorado, and Liberation Labs' 600,000 liter facility that broke ground in Indiana. These facilities and others will help the fermentation industry address existing capacity bottlenecks and position the sector for future growth. At least 123 other companies have been active in the fermentation industry through investments, partnerships, or business lines. This includes many of the world's largest meat and consumer packaged good companies. Multinational companies like Nestle, Kraft Heinz, Cargill, and Tyson are all involved in the fermentation industry. In 2023, for example, Friesland Campina Ingredients entered a strategic partnership with Triple Bar to develop precision fermentation-derived ingredients. Thai Union invested in Algama Foods. Danone Manifesto Ventures invested in Imagine Dairy. And Grupo Nutresa entered a joint development agreement with the Every Company. In addition to involvement from large food companies, the fermentation sector is full of examples of collaboration between fermentation companies, equipment suppliers, retailers, and more. Several new partnerships were formed in 2023, largely centering around product development and distribution. Plus, industry associations like the Fungi Protein Association, the Precision Fermentation Alliance, and Food Fermentation Europe all continue to enhance collaboration across the sector. This continued commitment to cooperation bodes well for the industry's ability to effectively grow the sector. And now I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Taylor, to discuss consumer insights.
Thanks, Daniel. My name is Taylor Lead-Otley. I'm the U.S. Consumer Research Lead for the Good Food Institute. As Daniel mentioned, many companies are working to bring fermented proteins to market, including meat and dairy made from traditional, biomass, and precision fermentation. Fermentation in general has been having a moment in the food market for the last few years. In the US, sales for traditional fermented products like yogurt, kimchi, and kombucha have been rising for years. Still, the use of fermentation to make meat and dairy without animals is a new idea to most people. Luckily, a lot of research was done on consumers' perceptions of and receptivity to fermented proteins in 2023 and recent years. And much of it shows positive signs for consumer demand for fermented proteins. So we'll give a quick overview of recent research, including how people respond to different names and descriptors for these products, people's awareness of and receptivity to these products, and what expectations people have for them. So let's start with what the industry calls fermented proteins and why that matters to consumers. In 2023, GFI and Accenture did research on precision fermented dairy in 5 countries: France, Germany, Spain, the UK, and US. We tested consumers' reactions to many different names and descriptors for precision fermented dairy to learn about their pros and cons. We found that descriptors that simply emphasize that they don't come from animals, like animal free and close translations of that phrase, were most appealing across countries, and that people could see themselves using those terms in social contexts. Descriptors mentioning fermentation and brewing performed well in some countries, but were polarizing in others. Despite the popularity of fermented foods generally, many consumers just aren't familiar with the concept of fermentation and brewing in the context of protein. So overall, people want to know what they're eating when they choose these products and want to know that they're made without animals, but they're okay without a long scientific description. Other research on precision fermented dairy and on terms like mycoprotein and mycelium has found similar results and is summarized in the full report. Research suggests there is a wide range of familiarity with various terms for fermented proteins, including significant minorities of consumers in some countries who claim to have heard of the concept of fermented protein. A 2022 study by the Boston Consulting Group and Blue Horizon found that 47% of consumers globally had heard of fermentation-based proteins. But in the US, awareness and familiarity with specific products like animal-free dairy and mycoprotein is still low, as shown here based on results from research done by Morning Consult on behalf of GFI in 2023. So these products are new to most consumers. But when we explain them to people, people find them appealing, including both fermented meat and dairy. And research suggests that more people are finding these products appealing as they learn more about them. Research by the International Food Information Council in 2021 and 2023 found that the number of consumers who rated the idea of fermented protein as appealing rose from 27 to 37% in those 2 years. Now, few people say they would buy these products today based on descriptors alone, but that's not surprising since most people aren't familiar with them. It's also important for us to understand what benefits people associate with these products, even in the context of low awareness, to understand what benefits would make people choose them as more come to market. And people expect that these products will be equally or more sustainable than conventional animal-based proteins. Significant numbers expect them to be as healthy as or healthier than conventional meat, even though many are concerned that they will be processed as well. And many are not yet convinced of their taste, which is not surprising since most people have yet to try these products. So overall, these results suggest that many consumers are intrigued by fermented proteins and respond well to names that many companies already use in the market. It suggests that consumers associate them with sustainability and health, but will need some convincing on taste and about whether they are processed, and that there's a long way to go to build mainstream awareness and to ensure that consumers understand the benefits of these products. With that, I'll hand it back to Daniel to talk about investments in fermentation companies in 2023.
Thanks, Taylor. In this section, we'll look at private investments in fermentation companies and how those investments fit into the broader economic environment. Let's first talk about the broader private funding environment in 2023. Rising interest rates, elevated inflation, and a mixed economic outlook subdued private investments last year. Global venture funding across all sectors fell 42% year over year, and that brought funding to its lowest levels since 2017. Climate tech equity investments decreased by as much as 40% year over year, despite the sector receiving significant government support through policies that helped to de-risk and fuel private investment. Investments in food tech startups declined by 61% year over year. Alternative proteins weren't immune to these declines, but they also didn't deviate too significantly from these broader trends. Alternative protein investments fell 44% year over year in 2023, and private investments in fermentation companies declined at a slower pace, falling 32% year over year. Private investments in alternative proteins totaled $1.6 billion in 2023. That brought funding over the last decade to $15.7 billion. While these funding levels demonstrate significant progress over the last 10 years, they also underscore the nascency of this sector. For comparison, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, $1.7 trillion was invested in clean energy globally in 2023. That means all-time private alternative protein investments comprised less than 0.1% of last year's global clean energy funding, despite animal agriculture contributing to between 11 and 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Fermentation companies raised $515 million in 2023, representing a 32% decrease from 2022. This was a slower rate of decline than overall global venture funding. Fermentation remains a relatively nascent sector, and a small number of deals can significantly impact annual investment totals for the industry. For example, in 2022, nearly half of the year's total investment dollars were raised in just 3 deals. The fermentation sector lacked similarly sized rounds in 2023. Last year's 3 largest deals combined to total $169 million. These are impressive totals for early stage and often pre-revenue companies, but without any multi-hundred million dollar deals raised, a much larger number of similarly sized deals would have been required to keep pace with recent years' industry-wide investment totals. Therefore, while macro and industry-related challenges impacted lower funding totals, it's not clear we should put too much stock in year-to-year variation. More investment is certainly needed for the fermentation industry to achieve significant growth. But it's also important to remember that the impacts of investments are cumulative. Technical, operational, and scientific knowledge gained as the result of investments in 2022 and earlier benefit the sector in 2023 and beyond. While that's all the more reason to direct funding toward the fermentation industry today, it also means that despite private investment slowing in 2023, innovation and progress continued to move forward. Fermentation for alternative proteins is still in its early days. Reaching its full potential requires significant investments in research and development and scaling. As companies continue to innovate and as more talent, research funding, and investments flow into the sector, the industry will be better positioned for success. 2023 also continued the multi-year trend toward a more global fermentation industry. North America and the US in particular have historically led the way in alternative protein and fermentation investments. But in recent years, other countries and regions have increased their share of investments. While overall totals were generally subdued along with the broader funding environment and industry-specific challenges, Europe showed relative strength in 2023. Fermentation funding in Europe totaled $179 million in 2023, an increase from 2022 and the highest annual total for the region to date. The ongoing regional diversification of fermentation industry activity is an important trend. As investment and innovation take place in more locations around the world, more local, regional, and national governments will have opportunities to provide support. Plus, the distribution of companies, funding, and technology will help make the industry more resilient to future shocks. And finally, it's important to note that various funding models can support the growth of the alternative protein industry. While venture capital and other private investments receive much of the attention and have contributed the most to date, the funding environment is constantly evolving. Non-dilutive and strategic funding and support, such as debt, grants, and government incentives, are essential for companies to lower production costs and achieve price parity as they scale production. To enable alternative protein companies to access such funding, we need creative and collaborative solutions across the private and public sectors. Fortunately, replicable solutions are already being implemented, such as school districts procuring alternative proteins for lunch menus. And some models have been successfully used in other industries, like government loan guarantees and blended philanthropic financing for renewable energy. As the economic environment changes and the industry matures, we expect to see some of these other funding models grow increasingly important to the alternative protein industry. GFI is conducting ongoing research into the changing funding landscape, and we plan to share some of those insights soon, so stay tuned for those resources. And with that, I'll pass it over to Lucas to cover updates in fermentation science and technology.
Thanks, Daniel. My name is Lucas Eastham, a senior scientist focused on fermentation at GFI, and today I will go over research and development highlights from 2023. So let's step back and remember the research and development innovation that goes into progressing ideas into a commercial product and onto our plates. Much of this innovation progress can be tracked in scientific journals and in patent applications. For patent applications, what began as a trickle of applications in the first half of the 20-teens has led to nearly 1,600 patent applications across many fermentation companies. In 2023 alone, there were over 330 patent applications and 43 granted patents. So while investments were down in 2023, there was substantial commercial scientific progress in this space. This patent IP innovation, while perhaps a lagging indicator of investment return, can be a leading indicator of product development and pending entrance to the market, which we've seen from several of the companies here. The patent landscape presented mainly represents startup company innovation in the space. And for these companies, there has been over 1,000 patent applications in the past 36 months across multiple jurisdictions. This represents significant R&D progress across a mixture of precision fermentation, microprotein, microalgae, and gas fermentation companies. Now, while the sheer number of patents does not confer commercial success, this provides a great snapshot of a healthy R&D activity in the startup sector. These protected innovations, as well as scientific publications, really represent progress across the R&D technology stack. That is, taking a target ingredient to an end product through bioprocess development. Today, we'll provide a few R&D highlights across the fermentation pillars, and I encourage you to pause on the following slides for a snapshot or check out the report for more information. Fungal biomass was likely the most prolific area of progress with R&D development across both the public and the private sectors. In strain selection in fungal biomass processes, these can greatly improve the cost, quality, and sustainability of a process. For instance, the Protein Brewery received a patent protection for their thermotolerant fungal strain, which helps improve process efficiency by reducing cooling costs. And while strain engineering is not often considered in fungal biomass, there were interesting new strain developments, such as from UC Berkeley to improve the organoleptic properties of filamentous fungi. Finally, developing optimized food formulation plays a crucial role in the texture and taste of an end product. For example, there was collaborative research from the University of Leeds and corn, which helped elucidate the fungal hyphate interaction with the binding ingredient egg white protein. This team then developed an alternative binding formulation using potato protein. Now, from yeast to microalgae to gas fermenting bacteria, there are many, many different microorganisms that are excellent sources of protein and fats. These single-cell protein and microbial lipid sources are a prominent research area again in 2023. And strain development is an especially important area for alternative fats, as the oil profile and production can be tailored and improved in each microbe. For instance, C16 Biosciences reported on their palm oil replacement strain development efforts with the Agile Biofoundry. With so many different microbes and metabolisms, upstream process design can also vary greatly. For instance, a two-step gas fermentation to single-cell protein techno-economic model was published from BBEU and Ghent University, whereas MicroArena developed a system for brewing protein in space using both fungi and microalgae in a closed-loop system. In fact, microalgae offer a lot of end product potential due to their high protein and nutritional omega-3 fatty acid content. For instance, researchers in Singapore developed an improved plant-based fish cake using microalgae, and Corallo Foods was awarded a patent for a mycelium and microalgae hybrid product where the microalgae improves the flavor and fat profile of their alternative seafood product. Next, in precision fermentation, strain development will continue to be an area of improvement for target expression and productivity. Much of this work has occurred in the private sector. However, heme protein expression in different yeast and bacteria is increasingly being explored in the academic research sector. And while strain engineering gets a lot of attention in precision fermentation, downstream process development is a great way to improve cost, quality, and yield. For instance, the Every company was awarded a patent for a downstream process that improves protein purification and potentially valorizes exopolysaccharide byproducts. Finally, these precision protein ingredients are not always a drop-in replacement for their animal-derived source, Thus, formulation optimization is definitely needed for many ingredients. And we observe crucial research and development for casein and whey protein formulation from the likes of Wageningen University, New Culture, Perfect Day, and others. So overall, we really saw key R&D trends across these three areas. In strain development, alternative protein and fat targets seem to be becoming increasingly mainstream in the academic research sector. We also saw a stronger focus on end product formulation and characterization. From fungal protein to casein formulation, this work helps to improve the functional understanding for food formulation. And then finally, researchers are increasingly looking to feedstocks as a way to reduce costs and improve sustainability. In fact, in 2023, GFI released a side streams analysis which assessed potential feedstocks for fermentation from agricultural and processing residues. Building off of this analysis, GFI's research grant program had a call for proposals related to fermentation feedstocks. This very popular topic area awarded 3 new grantees a grant focused on fermentation feedstock development in 2023. Here are a few 2023 publication highlights from our GFI grantees. Our 2024 funding call for proposals is now open with an application deadline of May 23rd. And thank you so much to our family of donors that make this grant program possible and all the research possible as well. Now on to Adam Lehman, our lead fermentation scientist.
Thank you, Lucas. Going back to the patent application data for a minute, this activity represents progress and maturation of the global fermentation value chain, and we're seeing companies all across the globe seek protection for their innovations. Many of these innovations are ready to take the next steps towards commercialization into food ingredients and dishes. For the science and technology improvements in fermentation to lead to products that provide affordable, accessible, and delicious proteins, these innovations need to be guided and scaled into commercial production. In 2023, GFI sought to understand the global state of manufacturing capacity for fermentation-derived alt proteins. We found that there are at least 16 million liters of food-grade fermentation capacity available for AP production. This analysis highlighted the demand for pilot and demonstration facilities to help companies develop their innovations into commercial products and scale up. We looked into pathways for contract manufacturing, building your own facility, or potentially retrofitting a facility originally built for a parallel industry, such as brewing, organic acids fermentation, or enzyme production. Specifically, we found that biomass-derived producers may be able to rapidly unlock retrofit facilities. Helping the industry with finding production sites are several web-based resources. Synonym's capacitor database has been maintained, and in November 23, they released their latest State of Global Fermentation Capacity report. Additionally, last summer, the BioP2P network unveiled its biomanufacturing site database for the United States. New pilot through demonstration capacity has been announced by CDMOs, such as POW Bio in the US, Cauldron in Australia, and Scale Up Bio in Singapore. And finally, in the commercial scale space, new contract manufacturing capacity has been unveiled or commissioned, with US firms Mycotechnology and Fermentum offering food-grade capacity, along with Liberation Labs breaking ground on their precision fermentation facility in the summer of 2023. Nations committed to support of alternative protein biomanufacture have the opportunity to capitalize on skilled workforce development, food security, agricultural value chain expansion, and a better sustainability footprint for food production. In line with March 2023's publication of the Bold Goals for U.S. biotechnology and biomanufacturing, we have seen consortia coalescing around fermentation. These consortia contain companies from startups to large CPGs, along with workforce development, education, and scale-up facilities, all meant to work together as an ecosystem. A few examples. In Northern California, the Beam Circular effort has tapped regional R&D, growers, and state and industry leaders to develop a program and facility in the northern San Joaquin Valley to capitalize on the circularity between fermentation biomanufacturing and the agricultural outputs of the region. In Illinois, often thought of as a fermentation hotbed for the bioethanol industry, the IFAB Tech Hub aims to use the abundant feedstocks of the region for the development of precision fermentation production products at capacity. Finally, fermentation-derived products are demonstrating that they are sustainable, safe, and healthy. To dig deeper, pause this slide, plus open our State of the Industry publication for more. On the sustainability front, life cycle assessments, or LCAs, survey the inputs, resources, and energy required for production to assess the categories and magnitude of environmental impact for particular products. An LCA combined with a nutritional assessment from the University of Helsinki demonstrated the sustainability advantages of fermentation-derived proteins over traditional animal-derived sources. An industry and academic collaboration led by King's College of London published a study on the potential waste-to-food fermentation industry, identifying feedstocks and microbial species ready to convert them into food proteins. The results highlighted the volumetric potential of xylose sugar as a feedstock if the technology to use it could be unlocked. In safety studies, Helena, producers of precision fermentation human lactoferrin, launched a clinical study looking at the immune-boosting potential of the iron-binding protein. The Protein Brewery led a published safety assessment of a filamentous fungal strain of Rhizomucorpusillus, demonstrating the safety for its pasteurized protein end product. In nutrition, Marlow Foods, the makers of corn, continued to fund peer-reviewed university-led research into mycoprotein health and wellness benefits. And lastly, GFI grantees Eddie Smid and Jasper Zwinkels of Wageningen University published a manuscript on improving the protein digestibility of plant-based feedstocks using fungal solid-state fermentation. That's all for our 2023 science and technology developments. I'll turn it over to Mackenzie for our government and regulatory updates.
Thanks, Adam. I'm Mackenzie Battle, and I'm a regulatory attorney on GFI's policy and government relations team. I'll be discussing some regulatory developments pertaining to fermented alternative proteins from 2023, and I'll start with the European Union. In the EU, most fermentation-derived alt proteins are regulated under the Novel Foods Regulation. However, fermented products produced with genetic modification are regulated under the European Regulation on Genetically Modified Food and Feed. If the European Commission and representatives from each EU member state approve a product for sale under either of these regulations, that approval would apply across all of the EU member states. In 2023, the European Commission approved Mycotechnology's novel food application for the approval of their pea and rice protein, which is fermented by shiitake mushroom mycelia, and novel food applications from Nature's Find, Solar Foods, Perfect Day, and the Protein Brewery are currently pending. The EU is also assessing Impossible Foods' soy leghemoglobin under its genetically modified food regulation. Moving on to the United Kingdom, while the UK is no longer part of the EU, it has largely retained the substance of the EU's novel food regulation. Some fermentation companies seeking to sell their products in the UK will need to apply for authorization from the UK Food Standards Agency, or FSA, depending on whether their product has a history of consumption in the UK. FSA provides some guidance for those applications on its website to make that easier for the applicants. And earlier this year, the UK FSA indicated that it would be implementing changes to its novel food regulations that could speed up the process for precision fermentation product approvals in the future. This indication came after a 2023 report from Deloitte was commissioned by FSA to outline a roadmap for UK regulators to improve the regulatory processes for products of precision fermentation as well as cultivated meat. So in Canada, an agency called Health Canada is responsible for national health standards and policy, including those that pertain to fermentation-derived alternative meat and dairy products. Health Canada evaluates products produced with precision fermentation as novel foods. Manufacturers are required to submit detailed scientific data for review before their food products are authorized for sale. Health Canada's guidelines for the safety assessment of novel foods derived from plants and microorganisms outlines the specific criteria that Health Canada uses to assess the safety of novel foods. And finally, on global regulation, here are a couple of updates from Singapore and Israel. Singapore was the first nation to approve a gas-fermented microbe-based protein called Selene in 2022, and Singapore is continuing to regulate new foods created with fermentation as novel foods that require approval from the Singapore Food Agency before they're allowed for sale. In Israel, Remilk obtained the first regulatory approval of its kind in the country to market and sell products containing its precision fermented derived protein in April 2023. So now we'll turn to the US regulation of fermented alternative protein products. In the US, FDA has regulatory authority over fermentation-derived foods. FDA offers two potential regulatory pathways that companies can follow to ensure their novel fermentation-derived foods and ingredients might be sold in the US. First, countries can submit a food additive petition to FDA. This route is a lengthy process that involves a consultation with FDA and a petition to the agency that asks FDA to issue a regulation that explicitly allows certain uses of an ingredient or additive. The second and far more common pathway is the GRAS notice pathway. So GRAS stands for Generally Recognized as Safe, and companies can self-affirm their products as GRAS, which means that the companies believe their product or ingredient is already generally recognized as safe among qualified experts under its specific intended conditions of use. If a company chooses to go the GRAS pathway, it has two other options. It may begin using the ingredient that it has self-affirmed as GRAS without submitting any notice to FDA if the company has full confidence in its product's safety status. But more commonly, a company will submit a GRAS notice to FDA that describes the intended use of the product and justifies its GRAS status with studies, data, and opinions from qualified experts. In response to that GRAS notification, FDA will either inform the applicant that they need more evidence to indicate the product is safe, or FDA will issue something called a no questions letter, which indicates that FDA does not disagree with the company's assertion that its product is generally recognized as safe. This is not technically an approval, but it does mean that the company can use their product without fear of FDA coming to a different conclusion than the company did about the product's safety. The majority of fermentation companies in the United States elect to take the GRAS pathway over submitting a food additive petition. And in recent years, each of the companies on this slide have obtained no questions letters from FDA in response to their GRAS submissions. So most recently, in February 2023, Remilk received a no questions letter from FDA regarding their production organism. And finally, I'll talk about the labeling and nomenclature for these products a bit. So as far as labeling goes, there are no federal labeling regulations specific to fermented alternative protein products in the United States. But the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard, which is promulgated by the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, could apply to some fermented food products. FDA is also planning to release draft guidance on the labeling of plant-based alternatives to animal-derived products in 2024. And this could preview how the agency is thinking about fermentation-derived alternatives, or this upcoming guidance could possibly even apply to some of those products. Until there's more information about how to label these products from federal agencies, companies have been using terms such as animal-free dairy or non-animal dairy to describe products that contain milk proteins created with precision fermentation. And biomass fermentation companies have generally used more unique qualifiers for their products. And now I'll hand it over to Michael to talk a little bit about public funding.
Thank you, Mackenzie, for those important regulatory updates. I'm Michael Carter, Policy Specialist in Diplomacy here at GFI, and I'd like to discuss global public investment in fermentation, where we're at and where we're going. 2023 was a great year for public investment in fermentation, with support for the technology and for alternative proteins generally growing across the globe. We saw steady progress from governments in recognizing fermentation as a key technology and providing the field with R&D and much-needed commercialization support in building infrastructure at all production levels. Some of fermentation's top supporters in 2023 were the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, all of which funded necessary research and development through grants, consortia, and multi-stakeholder programs. The United States began a multi-million-dollar research program through the Department of Defense to study fermentation in space, exploration, and defense applications, while the Department of Agriculture awarded a loan guarantee to support the construction of a fermentation facility in the Midwest. The European Union likewise provided a large grant to build fermentation capacity in France and announced 50 million euros to support startups in precision fermentation in algae. Finally, the UK not only announced a new cellular agriculture research hub, but awarded several grants and research funding packages to fermentation scientists and startups in 2023. Overall, the global community of supportive governments not only expanded in 2023, but deepened its support for the technology. Many countries made additional commitments, including first-time commitments from Austria, Germany, and Sweden. The European Union remains by far the top supporter of fermentation, nearly doubling its all-time total investment in 2023, while the United States jumped to number 2. The Netherlands, which in 2022 allocated $65 million for a Cellular Agriculture Netherlands program, and Finland, which has heavily supported local fermentation companies in building production facilities, follow close behind. Policymakers supported fermentation for many reasons, both global and domestic. Fermentation is an important tool for reducing pollution, food waste, and greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, and investing in its development can improve the quantity, quality, and sustainability of food available to the world's population. At the same time, fermentation can support domestic economies, food security, and other national priorities. Governments made investments in fermentation R&D and infrastructure to support job creation, resource valorization, and the development of a future industry, realizing the benefits of early investments in the field. In addition to direct investments, the world's largest economies included alternative proteins, including fermentation, in a slew of national plans intended to promote the development of biotechnology more generally. The first country to do so was China, which in 2022 released the 14th Five-Year Plan for Bioeconomy Development, which featured alternative protein sources as a key area. 2023 reporting indicates that the cost of bioreactors is more competitive in China than in North America or Europe, potentially due to government investment and other policies under the 14th Five-Year Plan. In 2023, both the United States and the United Kingdom released plans to bolster their own biotechnology sectors, citing the importance of early investments in a field that could revolutionize food, fuel, pharmaceuticals, materials, and more. The UK's National Vision for Engineering Biology calls for investment in research, development, and infrastructure for alternative proteins. The White House's bold goals for US biotechnology and biomanufacturing similarly highlights the necessity of developing alternative protein technology, with chapters from the Departments of Agriculture and Energy calling out fermentation explicitly and reiterating the need for further investment. However, despite all the good news and major announcements in 2023, global public investment in alternative proteins still falls short of the mark. Governments play a crucial role in developing and deploying new technologies, especially on the timeline needed to address global challenges like climate change and food insecurity. A global innovations needs assessment finds that APs can deliver these benefits only if governments adopt and maintain a level of support comparable to other essential developing technologies. GFI estimates that in 2023, governments provided less than 4% of this recommended support. In 2024 and beyond, policymakers should continue to provide essential research and development funding, support the private sector in building domestic workforces and infrastructure, and include fermentation and alternative proteins generally in plans to invest in promising new technologies and essential global and domestic solutions. Thank you for your attention, and I'll now pass it back to Daniel for the outlook.
Thanks, Michael. With that, let's take a look at what lies ahead for the fermentation industry. Scaling a sector from virtually non-existent to commercial volumes is a monumental task. Precision fermentation for chymosin and other ingredient production took 10 to 20 years to achieve maturation. Replicating the same market penetration with a growing list of increasingly complex target end products while remaining cost competitive is no small feat. So what does the future hold for the sector? Increased public funding, a private funding slowdown, and manufacturing scale-up defined the sector in 2023. Those factors will continue to drive the direction of the industry in 2024. The private funding market will probably remain tight. Some fermentation companies will access the financing they need to grow their businesses, but they'll do so in a less conducive environment than in recent years. As a result, it will be increasingly important for governments around the world to step up to support the growing fermentation-enabled food sector. And companies will need to continue to refine and scale their production processes to increase volumes and lower costs. All of that said, the fermentation category is rapidly evolving. New and innovative products frequently come to market, but the fermentation subpillars exist at different stages of industry development. Many biomass fermentation companies hold the potential for significant near-term market upside in the meat and dairy categories. Several companies in the space have achieved widespread distribution, and some biomass fermentation products are sold at relatively competitive price points. On the other hand, biomass fermentation companies pursuing more novel products and processes, like those creating food from carbon dioxide, are likely to be further from broad market penetration. Some alternative protein ingredients made with precision fermentation have also achieved widespread distribution. But while a handful of new products may hit the market in a limited capacity in 2024, the path to both scale and cost competitiveness is likely longer for precision fermentation companies. Traditional fermentation is already widely used in alternative proteins, especially in the plant-based dairy category. Improvements in fermentation processes can help make plant-based dairy products close the taste and texture gap with their conventional counterparts. Many traditional fermentation processes are cost-effective and scalable, positioning traditional fermentation products for near-term growth. Other traditional fermentation processes, like those used to create whole-cut beef products, may be further from commercial scale due to their novelty, but also hold significant upside potential over the medium term. So will the fermentation sector grow to reach $15 billion by 2030, $74 billion by 2050? Meeting even low-end estimates would require notable advancements in production efficiency, costs, and most importantly, capacity. Robust contract manufacturing infrastructure would need to develop quickly, and a large number of fermentation facilities from the beer, wine, and biofuel industries would need to be retrofitted for alternative protein production. Given the current environment, significant growth from today's market size is possible, but it necessitates levels of public and private investment many times higher than today's norms. But the opportunity for the fermentation-enabled food and alternative protein markets is vast. Considering the size of the $1 trillion global meat market, significant increases in support for alternative proteins are justified by their potential climate, public health, and food security benefits. Fermentation companies need to continue to innovate to scale production, bring costs down, and ensure a fair regulatory landscape. While the private funding environment, health of individual alternative protein companies, and media sentiment are constantly changing, the challenge before us is not. Animal agriculture accounts for between 11 and 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and meat consumption is expected to grow by 50% from 2012 levels by 2050. If governments, companies, and investors are serious about improving food security, reducing emissions, and achieving climate goals, they must dedicate more research and funding toward alternative proteins. So thank you for tuning in to our presentation on fermentation-enabled meat, seafood, eggs, and dairy. We're optimistic about the future of fermentation as an agricultural innovation with implications for planetary and public health, strong bioeconomies, and a more resilient global food supply. But we know there's a long road ahead. We need investments in research and development and equipment, fair regulatory frameworks, continued product innovation, and consumer buy-in. If you're involved in this ever-changing industry, please sign up for our newsletter to stay updated on GFI resources and events. As a reminder, there are 2 more webinars in this series focusing on the plant-based and cultivated sectors, and we invite you to watch those as well. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.